He who sets no boundaries becomes a stage for disrespect. He who upholds them with firmness transforms silence and consistency into his invisible crown of power. Disrespect never arrives announcing its presence. It doesn't explode like thunder or cut through the air like the crack of a gun. It whispers. It seeps into small gestures, into glances that linger a second longer than they should, into tones of voice laden with irony, into jokes disguised as friendship, into interruptions that seem innocent but carry a hidden message. You don't matter as much as you think. That's how it all begins. Almost imperceptible, almost invisible. Most people laugh along, pretend not to notice, tell themselves it's not worth arguing, that it's better to let it slide. But in that instant, in that seemingly noble choice of tolerance, defeat has already been sealed. Because disrespect isn't just a misplaced word, it's not just a tasteless joke. Disrespect is a test, a calculated provocation to measure how far you'll allow others to advance against you. And every time you ignore it, every time you smile so as not to appear weak, every time you tell yourself this isn't worth fighting over, you deliver the most dangerous response of all. I offer no resistance. I am no threat. I am not worthy of respect. Machiavelli understood this better than almost anyone. He lived in a time when showing weakness was not only shameful, but lethal. In a world of constant betrayal, silent manipulation, and calculated elimination, there was no room for naivety. He grasped a brutal truth that the weak still refuse to accept. Respect is not earned as a reward for merit. Respect is imposed as law. It is engraved in fire and repeated until it becomes unquestionable. That is why some spend their lives being ignored, belittled and ridiculed, while others, even in silence, are treated with reverence. The difference is not in kindness, talent, or virtue. The difference lies in how each person reacts to the first sign of disrespect. Think of how many nights you've gone to bed and, as you closed your eyes, an old scene came back with overwhelming force. Someone made a joke at your expense, a colleague mocked you in public, a friend used a sarcastic tone that everyone noticed. You said nothing. Maybe you laughed to cover it up. Maybe you changed the subject. Maybe you even thanked them for the joke. But now, alone, you relive that scene as if it were an open wound. You feel your anger rising. You imagine sharp responses you could have given, firm actions you could have taken, looks that could have silenced everyone. But you did nothing. And that's exactly why the scene keeps coming back. Disrespect doesn't go away when ignored. It lodges. It ferments. It shapes the way you see yourself. Because with each cowardly silence, it's not just the aggressor who gets the message. It's you who convince yourself, I don't deserve defense. I'm not worthy enough. This is the invisible poison that corrodes from the inside out. With every concession, you lose territory. Not just in front of others, but within yourself. And regaining internal territory is one of the hardest battles. That's why often, the kindest, most patient, and most generous end up being the biggest victims of emotional and social abuse, because they believe that good will be repaid with good, that patience will be recognized, that kindness generates respect. But that's not how the world works. The world doesn't reward cowardly silence. The world rewards action. And if you don't take your stand, someone else will. You might wonder, wouldn't it be overreacting to every detail? Wouldn't it be paranoid to see disrespect in every gesture? That's the trap. Intelligent disrespect doesn't present itself as a punch, demanding an immediate response. It oozes like diluted poison, first a light joke, then a condescending tone, later an exclusion here, an interruption there. Isolated, they seem silly, but together they form a pattern, a deadly pattern. The aggressor observes, tests, measures your reaction. With every laugh, every time you don't defend yourself, with every dodge, he learns he can advance further. Until the day you look around and realize you've become everyone's emotional punching bag. Disrespect never comes alone. It brings with it a sequence, a script, and if you don't interrupt the narrative, the story is always the same. You lose, the other person wins. The people who most believe in the power of kindness end up becoming the repository of other people's frustrations. Colleagues interrupt them without hesitation. Friends make jokes at their expense. Family members dismiss their opinions. Partners ignore boundaries. And when, finally, anger explodes and your weary heart rebels, the reaction seems disproportionate. You yell, lose control, and ironically, this outburst becomes yet another weapon against you. Look how exaggerated you are. Look how you don't know how to control yourself. The cycle closes. You are trained to be ignored in silence and judged when you speak. Machiavelli was under no illusions about this. He knew that human relationships are governed by invisible and incessant struggles for power. Every encounter between two people is a silent negotiation of status. Every word, every gesture, every silence defines hierarchy. While most play checkers, reacting only to what appears, few play chess, calculating future moves, seeing patterns, occupying positions. That's why some attract respect almost effortlessly, while others beg for it their entire lives and never receive it. And the question many avoid is the problem with others, or is it with you? Because if disrespect were only the product of bad and unjust people, it would be the exception. But it repeats itself over and over again, targeting the same people. Why? Because these people have trained the world to treat them this way. The predator doesn't attack just anyone. It observes, chooses, analyzes who doesn't react, who doesn't bite, who backs down. Disrespect works the same way. It sniffs out weakness. And the most common weakness is excessive kindness, the false nobility that confuses tolerance with cowardice. How many times have you heard phrases like, "Be the stronger one, let it go," or "There's no point in arguing, ignore it"? Culture teaches us that maturity is swallowing toads, that strength is not reacting, that nobility is accepting humiliation with a smile. But human psychology doesn't work that way. When you let it go, no one thinks, "What an evolved person." They just think, "Easy target." It's painful to admit, but disrespect doesn't disappear when ignored. It grows. It corrodes your external image, and even worse, your inner self. You begin to believe you don't deserve to be treated better. You become accustomed to mediocrity in relationships. You accept less than your worth. And by accepting, you reinforce the cycle. Each concession is one less stone in the wall of your dignity, until you begin to doubt whether there's anything left in you worth defending. Therefore, the first step on this journey is to understand that disrespect is never innocent. It's never an accident. It's always a test. It's always a strategic move, even when it seems spontaneous. It always carries the question, will you allow it? And every time the answer is yes, every time you pretend not to see, every time you convince yourself that it's mature to ignore it, the other person learns the lesson. You are someone who can be used. Now be brutally honest with yourself. How many times throughout your life have you made it clear that you were willing to be used? How many times has your passivity encouraged others to go further, to laugh louder, to ignore your opinion, to mock your boundaries? How many times, believing you were avoiding conflict, have you sealed your own fate? Disrespect is like a snake slithering silently through a dark room. While you don't turn on the light, while you don't move, it approaches. At first slowly, almost invisible, then increasingly boldly until it wraps itself around your legs and suffocates your space. This is the nature of disrespect. It never stops, never limits itself, never disappears on its own. It needs to be stopped. It needs to be confronted. It needs to be crushed before it grows to the point of swallowing everything. And here's the truth that the weak can't bear to hear. Silence at the wrong time isn't maturity, it's complicity. Laughing at self-deprecating jokes isn't sportsmanship, it's submission. Letting it slide just this once isn't understanding, it's self-abandonment. Every time you allow something, you teach. Every time you ignore it, you train. Every time you remain silent, you surrender. This is how you explain a lifetime lived in the shadow of disrespect, destroyed careers, ruined relationships, shattered self-esteem. All because right at the beginning, faced with the first crooked smile, the first interruption, the person decided not to react. They decided it wasn't worth it. They decided silence was noble. And without realizing it, they signed an invisible contract. You can treat me however you want, I won't respond. But if you've made it this far, it's because you're tired of this contract. Because you already feel the weight of sleepless nights reliving humiliations. Because you've already understood that something needs to change. And change requires a shock. It requires recognizing that every ironic joke is an attack, every mocking tone a test, every cowardly silence an act of submission. And in the face of this recognition, a question arises that echoes like a relentless hammer. How long? How long will you laugh along just to avoid appearing weak? How long will you pretend not to care while burning inside? How long will you allow others to write your story while you watch in silence? The respect game has already begun. It began the first day someone mocked you and you smiled. It began with the first look of contempt you pretended not to notice. It began with the first silence you misjudged. And this game has only two roles, the respected and the used. The question now is brutal, direct, and impossible to avoid. Which role will you continue to play? Disrespect is never limited to an isolated incident. It's a pattern that infiltrates small, everyday situations, disguised as carelessness, disguised as playfulness, and presented as something banal. It's in seemingly unimportant details that the invisible hierarchy begins to form. The game doesn't just happen in major confrontations, but in the minutiae of everyday life, where the pieces move without you even realizing it. And when you finally do, you're already on a board where every gesture, every word, and every silence weighs more than you imagined. Imagine walking into a work meeting. You always sit in the same place, but that day someone arrives after you and takes your seat. You say nothing. You think it's not worth it. But you soon realize that the same colleague avoids looking you in the eye when you speak, while the manager coordinates the agenda without even mentioning your name. Another colleague offers generous help with recording the minutes and asks you to summarize your proposal in a few words, as if your idea needed to pass through their filter to exist. In the hallway, muffled laughter echoes behind you. When you turn your head, they ask if everything's okay, with a smile that doesn't match their voice. You answer yes and move on, trying to convince yourself it's just a coincidence. But it's not. It's a pattern. It's the game playing out. The price of your tolerance is the silent erosion of your authority. Similar situations recur in other contexts. Think of a dinner with longtime friends. Everyone RSVPs, but the day before two cancel. One sends a hasty message praising your dedication, and another shows up 40 minutes late, making a joke about your latest embarrassment. You laugh so as not to seem annoying, and someone adds, "But we love you, you know." You smile, but when the bill arrives, the latecomer forgets their wallet, another says they're out of balance, and the third asks you to fix the problem, promising to pay later. You pay because you don't want any embarrassment. 2 days pass and no one mentions the matter. A week later, the silence continues. When you finally collect, you receive a light-hearted response. "Wow, that's true, I'm so inconsiderate, I completely forgot." It's not forgetfulness, it's confirmation that you are the invisible one responsible for bearing the costs. Not just financial costs, but emotional and symbolic ones. You paid more than the bill. You paid with dignity. In the family environment, the scene repeats itself in different ways. During lunch, a relative makes a harsh critique of your career, disguised as sincerity. Another interrupts with a joke to lighten the mood, but the joke is also on you. You swallow hard and change the subject, not wanting to turn the meal into an argument. But at night, when you try to sleep, the scene returns with a vengeance. Do you know why? Because everyone saw it. Everyone witnessed the silent recording of your passivity. The social brain doesn't forget who keeps quiet, who imposes, who apologizes, and who gives orders. This collective memory shapes how you'll be treated next time. At work, logic becomes even more cruel. Who interrupts and who is interrupted? Who copies the boss on emails when they could resolve the issue directly with you? Who suggests changes to your project without acknowledging their authorship? Who praises you in public, calling you a genius, but in private ignores your priorities? Excessive praise is the curtain that hides an attempt to diminish your influence. It's like someone slowly pulling the rug out from under you, smiling until you fall without realizing where the blow came from. Machiavelli would say that this is the essence of politics. There's no need to say anything, just create habits. Whoever dictates the habit dictates the hierarchy, and hierarchy imposes itself long before any speech. You might think all this happens only in toxic companies or dysfunctional families, but look around. It's in your condominium, when the building manager ignores your complaint until a more influential neighbor repeats the same complaint. It's at the gym when the instructor praises everyone, but when he looks at you, he only says, "Thank you." It's at the doctor's office, when your pain is quickly diagnosed as anxiety without even a test. It's in line at the movies, when someone pretends not to see you and cuts in front of you with a "it'll be quick." Small imbalances that accumulate until they create a slope, where every step feels like a stumble. Little by little, you get used to walking while apologizing for your very existence. But how do you recognize the first signs of this invisible game? The secret lies in the difference between words and gestures. Our colleague says, "Your presentation was great," but checks their watch while speaking. A friend apologizes, but their tone lessens the impact of the offense. A relative repeats, "It's out of love," but chooses public moments to embarrass you. Body language is the true subtitle of what's said, and the human tribal brain still reads posture, intonation, rhythm, and space better than rehearsed phrases. Who occupies the center without being called upon? Who touches you while speaking? Who scatters objects on the table? Who decides who speaks first? These are the markers of territory. The board isn't symbolic, it's physical. So something curious happens when you decide to change the dynamic. Imagine a meeting where you arrive early, sit in the center of the table, calmly open your notebook, and keep your phone put away. When someone interrupts you, you stop mid-sentence and just stare, without anger, without haste, without a smile. The silence weighs heavily. 3 seconds seem long, 4 become eternal, until the other person gives in and gives you back the floor. Sorry, you can continue. It's not about winning an argument, but about rewriting the habit. The following week, the same colleague thinks twice before cutting you off. Not because they agree with you, but because they've learned the cost has changed. The first move is always silent. Once made, it changes the gravity of the atmosphere. Another example arises outside of work. That friend who always forgets their wallet asks for help again. You listen, breathe, and reply, "I can't today." They insist, and you calmly repeat, "Not today." Guilt tries to take over. You almost feel the need to justify it, but you resist. At the next meeting, when the bill arrives, you don't take out your wallet first, you wait. The silence grows until someone breaks it. "Shall we split it?" The pattern breaks. Maybe they joke, "Look, this is serious." You don't react. The laughter dies without fuel. For the first time, the table learned that you are no longer the clown of your own discomfort. Small stories reveal giant changes. A woman driving her son to school always went unnoticed by the other mothers. One day, she decided to arrive 5 minutes early and stand still, without her cell phone, just observing. The first week, nothing happened. The second, someone started a conversation. The third, greetings became routine. 2 weeks later, an invitation for coffee arrived. What changed? Presence. Where before there was defensive haste, there was now offensive calm. The board responded to the new peace, not because it became cooler, but because it became clearer. And clarity is power. Invisibility is defeat. In the digital world, the game is even more insidious. The work group sends messages on the weekend. You always respond quickly, creating the expectation of unlimited availability. One day, you decide to respond only on Monday at 9 a.m. Nothing explodes, no one dies. On Friday night, a message arrives with the word urgent. You breathe, wait, and respond on Saturday. You need it today or by Wednesday. This simple question dismantles the manipulation of urgency. Those who don't react automatically cannot be controlled. Calibrating the response resets the board without confrontation, merely adjusting the costs. Manipulators hate clarity because clarity destroys shortcuts. And what happens when disrespect disguises itself as charm? Seductive invitations, promises of a bright future, unique opportunities. In the end, the request, "We just need you to dedicate yourself a little more. Accept extra responsibilities, handle more pressure." You give in, believing in the future. Weeks later, silence. Months later, you realize you played for free. The trick is old, exchanging clarity for promises. The only way out is to condition each agreement to concrete milestones. I'll do X when Y is signed. I'll deliver A after B is defined. Those who play fair don't fear clarity. Those who manipulate rely on vagueness. When the answer is vague, the message is already given. It wasn't a promotion, it was exploitation. In each scenario, the same dilemma repeats itself. How far will you let go? And each choice, each silence, each false smile reconfigures the board. You may never have thought about it, but social life is a constant series of micro-tests. The doorman who pretends not to hear your greeting, the waiter who looks at everyone before looking at you, the colleague who waits for your reaction before adjusting their tone. Everyone is measuring, everyone is learning how far they can go. With each concession you make, a line is drawn. And lines drawn are rarely erased without a fight. But there's something even deeper, the way you train yourself. When you ignore discomfort, you don't just allow others to advance. You reinforce within yourself the belief that you don't deserve more. You normalize mediocrity. You get used to less. And when you finally try to change, the shock isn't just external but internal. It's fighting a version of yourself that has learned for years to lower its head. That's why breaking this pattern seems so difficult. Because it's not just a battle against others, it's a war against yourself. The game of disrespect is subtle, but it has a clear rule. It never stops on its own. No matter how much you want to believe that patience will be recognized, that kindness will be reciprocated, that time will bring justice, experience shows otherwise. Those who don't react become recurring targets. Those who don't set limits become a platform for the arrogance of others. Those who don't respond train the world to ignore them. And with each practice, each repetition, each reinforced pattern, the cost of change increases until one day you look in the mirror and no longer recognize the face you see. The price of a lifetime of silence is the loss of your own identity. But here's the unexpected twist. This game isn't inevitable. At any moment you can turn the tables, and it doesn't require shouting, violence, or endless speeches. It only requires a clear decision to no longer accept anything less than respect. This decision starts small, almost invisible, but grows like a flame. The first time you refuse, the silence is uncomfortable. The second time, it's liberating. The third, it becomes a habit. And when the habit sets in, the board changes sides. Those who once laughed at you begin to measure their words. Those who once ignored you begin to count the cost. Those who once abused you begin to look for another victim. And this is where the inevitable question arises, the same one that haunts every person who has ever suffered in silence. How many more times will you laugh at what isn't funny? How many more times will you pay a price that isn't yours? How many more times will you swallow your anger just to maintain the peace that never exists? How long will you live within an invisible contract you yourself signed without realizing it? The answer isn't in the other person, it's in you. Because the game has already begun, and every minute of cowardly silence is a move in favor of the enemy. You decide whether to remain a used pawn or become a conscious player. This decision cannot be postponed forever, because with every second of hesitation, the serpent of disrespect coils tighter around your life. And if you don't act, sooner or later, it will suffocate everything. The game of respect is rarely explicit. It doesn't happen in fiery speeches, but in quiet details that accumulate until they define who commands and who obeys. If you observe closely, you'll notice that social life is more like a chessboard than a casual conversation. The pieces are always moving, even when no one is speaking. Who decides where to sit in a room? Who speaks first in a meeting? Who dares to interrupt someone mid-sentence? Every gesture is a calculated move, and even when it seems spontaneous, it never is. Because society as a whole functions around who occupies space and who gives way. Those who become accustomed to giving way soon discover that their lives have become dominated territory. Those who learn to occupy notice that others begin to measure their words in their presence. It's on this invisible chessboard that patterns of disrespect are cemented. They don't emerge from a grand dramatic scene, but from small repeated victories by those who dare to test their limits. The colleague who places their folder on your place at the table is registering symbolic possession. The friend who jokingly calls you forgetful is writing a narrative about your identity. The relative who interrupts you at lunch is teaching everyone present that you can be ignored without consequence. None of these gestures seem important in isolation, but together they form a map of power. And on this map, those who don't react become free territory. What happens when you decide that this territory is no longer available? Have you ever noticed how discomfort grows when someone breaks the expected script? Imagine a dinner party where everyone expects you to laugh at a bad joke, but this time you just stare in silence. The collective laughter turns to embarrassment. The jokester is floored, and suddenly the room's mood changes. Why does such a simple gesture alter the atmosphere so much? Because the entire board has been reconfigured. You didn't play the expected piece. You broke the pattern, and when the pattern breaks, everyone is forced to recalculate their moves. The question is, how many more times will you sustain patterns that don't serve you just to avoid seconds of silence? Disrespect thrives on predictability. If they know you're going to laugh, they keep laughing. If they know you're going to pay the bill, they keep forgetting their wallet. If they know you're going to explain yourself, they keep interrupting you. Predictability is the greatest ally of those who want to use you. Breaking this is like removing a key piece from the board. The whole game loses balance. Therefore, small changes in attitude have a disproportionate impact. When you decide not to get up immediately to give up your seat, when you let the silence linger instead of rushing to justify yourself, when you stare instead of laughing along, the entire structure shifts. Not because you yelled, but because you did the unexpected. And what happens when the unexpected becomes your new norm? Others begin to fear uncertainty. They fear it not because you'll explode, but because they no longer know how to manipulate you. Unpredictability is the greatest terror for those accustomed to exploitation. If they don't know what to expect from you, they lose their grip on control. And the fear of losing control transforms relationships. How many have realized that all it took was a change in attitude for an entire group to start seeing you differently? How many have discovered that the absence of laughter is worth more than 1,000 excuses? But there's something even deeper. The chessboard doesn't just exist outside of you, it exists within. Every time you give in, you reinforce the image of someone undeserving of defense. Every time you react firmly, You engrave within yourself the memory of someone who protects themselves. This internal training is more powerful than any external response, because in the end, it's not just about what others think of you, but about who you believe yourself to be. Have you ever wondered how many of the external battles you've lost actually began within yourself? Everyday life is full of small, invisible pranks. The neighbor who parks in your space, the colleague who talks over you, the friend who asks for favors without ever returning them. You can ignore each of these situations, but the price is high. One day you wake up and realize you're living in a routine where everyone treats you like a supporting character, not because they're cruel, but because you've trained them to behave this way. How long will you accept that the stage of your life is always occupied by others while you cower on the sidelines? The game changes when you decide to increase the cost of disrespect. It's not revenge, it's calculation. That colleague who always interrupts doesn't learn anything if you keep talking over them. But if you stop, look silently, let the awkwardness set in, and then resume in the same tone of voice, they learn. The friend who never pays the bill doesn't change if you keep solving it. But if you wait, cross your arms, and let the silence weigh on you, someone breaks the pattern. The strategy isn't in overreaction, but in the coldness of the cost. Those who weigh the consequences quickly realize that using you is no longer advantageous. Have you ever thought about how many situations in your life could have turned out differently if you had increased the cost at the beginning? There's also the illusion of neutrality. Many believe that not reacting puts them in a safe position, as if they're above the game. But the board doesn't accept neutrals. Those who don't set limits become accomplices of the aggressor. Silence isn't seen as maturity, but as weakness. When you laugh at a joke against you, you're not showing sportsmanship, but signaling that that behavior is permitted. And when what's permitted is repeated, it becomes the rule. Can you see how many of the rules that imprison you today were written by your own silence? The turning point always starts small. The first thing that's not said calmly, the first silence that weighs more than any word, the first gaze that doesn't lower in the face of provocation. These are almost invisible gestures, but they reorganize forces. People may even laugh nervously, they may even try to provoke you more, but the discomfort has already set in. And discomfort is the seed of respect. The more someone fears discomfort, the more they begin to measure their own actions. Have you ever noticed how a simple pause of seconds can have more impact than minutes of discussion? But there's a secret few realize. Change isn't sustainable if it isn't consistent. Reacting once is just an accident, which others quickly forget. But reacting consistently in the same way transforms identity. Respect isn't born from an isolated gesture, but from consistency. Those who observe know when something is an exception and when it's standard. And the standard is what builds reputation. Have you ever noticed how some people don't need to raise their voices because everyone around them already knows exactly what their reaction will be? This is the difference between someone who constantly reacts and someone who imposes presence. The reactive person tries to fix situations. The consistent person shapes the environment before problems even arise. And this difference is felt almost physically. That's the weight of someone who, upon entering a space, already carries an aura that says they're not to be trifled with, not because they threatened, but because they never gave in. And the question remains, what aura are you spreading? Of someone who always backs down or someone who never accepts being used? The most powerful comebacks aren't the ones where you explode, but the ones where you change the script without saying anything. The group expects your laughter, but you remain serious. Your colleague expects you to explain, but you simply say, understood. Your relative expects you to change the subject, but you respond with a firmness that closes the subject. These moments are etched in the collective memory, and collective memory is the foundation of respect. How many memories have you failed to build because you chose the wrong silence? The game of disrespect is also the game of narrative. Every joke, every interruption, every exclusion tells a story about you. And if you don't correct the story, it becomes official. Therefore, every reaction is also an edit. When you silence a joke with calculated silence, you rewrite the narrative. When you refuse to pay the bill, you change the plot. When you interrupt the cycle of unrequited favors, you alter the script. And the more you edit, the more the plot begins to favor you. It's not about controlling everything, but about refusing roles that don't suit you. Have you ever wondered how many unworthy roles you've accepted to play so far? There's also an invisible layer that few realize. Respect isn't just about the words spoken or unsaid, but also about the management of time and attention. Those who interrupt you steal your time. Those who ignore you steal your attention. Those who rely on you without reciprocating your energy. And what do you do when faced with these thefts? Do you react like a resigned victim, or do you place a high price on every second of your life? Have you noticed how those who value their own time are automatically more respected? The disrespect board is treacherous because it feeds on your eagerness to avoid discomfort, but discomfort is inevitable. You can feel it by asserting yourself for a few seconds, or you can carry it through a lifetime of humiliation. The difference is that the first discomfort generates respect, the second generates contempt. Which of the two have you chosen so far? Ultimately, the central question of this stage is brutally simple. How long will you allow yourself to be used as a pawn in someone else's game? How long will you laugh at what isn't funny, pay for what isn't yours, swallow what destroys you? How long will you sustain with your silence the board that oppresses you, because the game won't stop? It only changes when you change. Silence has always been one of the most misunderstood phenomena in human life. Many believe it represents merely the absence of words, an awkward void that needs to be filled quickly to avoid discomfort. But the truth is that silence, when used consciously, is anything but empty. It can be an impenetrable shield against attacks, a precision weapon in negotiations, an invisible test of hierarchy, and at times, a power that instills more fear than any explicit threat. One need only observe history and everyday life to realize that those who master the pause dominate the game. Those who talk too much reveal weaknesses. Those who over-explain themselves give away ammunition. Those who rush to fill every space betray insecurity. Those who master silence create tension, project mystery, and force everyone around them to move around them. Imagine a meeting room where everyone speaks at once. Each person tries to impose their ideas, arguments clash, and the battle rages over volume and speed. In the midst of it all, there's a single individual who remains silent, attentive, and motionless. He doesn't try to defend himself, doesn't try to justify himself, doesn't rush to speak louder. He simply observes. What happens? Little by little, the attention that had been fragmented begins to focus on him. The silence creates gravity. When he finally decides to speak, each word is heard as a sentence, even if it's banal. Not because the content is extraordinary, but because the pause built anticipation. The silence transformed his speech into an event. And how many times in your life have you wasted this power by rushing to fill a void that could work in your favor? There are curious accounts in politics and business that attest to this power. During diplomatic negotiations between Japan and the United States in the 20th century, the Japanese used long silences as a strategy. To Westerners, prolonged silence seemed like a dead end, a veiled threat. Many American diplomats, unable to bear the burden of waiting, rushed to make concessions just to break the discomfort. What seemed like a mere pause was, in fact, a calculated tool to shift the balance of power. The absence of words wasn't weakness, it was dominance. If this worked in negotiations that determined the fate of nations, what might happen if you applied the same principle to small situations in your own life? In everyday life, equally surprising examples recur. An employee who was constantly interrupted decided to change his approach. Instead of striving to continue speaking above the noise, he began pausing every time someone interrupted him, staring at the speaker in silence until they fell silent. The first time generated nervous laughter. The second brought embarrassment. The third time, no words were needed. The group realized it wasn't worth interrupting him because the emotional cost was too high. What once seemed like submission now became authority. There was no need to shout, confront, or explain. Just endure the tension that others couldn't handle. Have you ever noticed how people will do anything to escape seconds of heavy silence? But there are also even more unlikely situations where silence changes everything. In social psychology experiments, researchers observed that when an individual in a group refused to respond immediately to a provocation, remaining silent for a few seconds, the aggressor often backed down. Silence, far from being interpreted as weakness, created a sense of unpredictability that generated fear. The aggressor didn't know if a response would come later, if there would be a counterattack, or if they would be ignored outright. This uncertainty diffused the attack. It's curious how something so simple can reverse the power of an entire situation. It's no exaggeration to say that a few seconds of silence have decided careers, relationships, and even political battles. On the other hand, most people can't stand silence because it demands emotional control. The heart races, the mind screams for justification, the muscles demand an immediate reaction. Breaking this impulse is an act of inner strength. It's withstanding the pressure of expectation while everyone else writhes in discomfort. It's precisely in this space that respect and authority are born. Those who can control themselves in the heat of provocation convey the most powerful message of all. I don't need to react to your rules. I set the pace. How many times have you lost an argument not because you were wrong, but because you rushed to speak too soon? There are curious reports from the military that also attest to this effect. During interrogations, soldiers trained to maintain absolute silence for long periods were more effective at destabilizing their captors than any aggressive response. The interrogator expected screams, cries, or pleas, but found only impenetrable silence. The emptiness was more threatening than any words. Silence in this case was not submission, but resistance. And this same mechanism can be applied to everyday situations, when someone tries to provoke you in public, when unfair criticism is leveled at you, when a joke tries to put you down. You can explain, you can defend yourself, you can counterattack. But silence sometimes weighs more heavily than any reaction. The fascinating thing is that silence not only changes external perception, but also internal perception. Those who begin to practice it discover they no longer need to rush to justify themselves. They discover they can endure discomfort and emerge stronger. They discover they don't need applause or constant approval. This practice builds quiet confidence, self-sufficiency that others perceive even without you saying anything. Have you ever stopped to think about what your life would be like if you didn't have to react to every criticism or every sideways glance? What kind of strength would you convey if you learned to endure the emptiness that most fear? Silence also acts as a filter. It reveals who is truly on your side and who simply relies on your predictability. Some will become irritated when you don't react as expected. Others will try to force you to speak, laughing or mocking, because they can't stand losing control. But there will be those who respect your stance and even adjust their own attitude in response to your calm. Silence, therefore, separates allies from opportunists. It shows who needs you to be predictable and who is willing to respect your limits. Do you have any idea how many would walk away from you if they discovered they could no longer manipulate you with words? At the same time, it's important to understand that silence shouldn't be used as an escape. It's not the cowardice of someone who doesn't know what to say, but the calculated decision not to waste energy where it's not worth it. This difference is subtle, but it changes everything. The silence of the weak is empty. The silence of the strong is full of meaning. When someone criticizes you and you remain silent because you don't know how to defend yourself, it conveys submission. But when someone provokes you and you remain silent because you decide it's not worth responding, it conveys power. Can you recognize the difference between the two within yourself? There are unlikely cases that show how silence can even save lives. In street confrontations, people who refused to react verbally to provocations avoided escalations of violence. The aggressor, expecting a response to justify the attack, found only a firm stare and a motionless body. Without the fuel of a reaction, the flame of conflict died out. This doesn't happen often, but there are records where silence transformed what could have been a tragedy into a dispersion. This shows that silence, besides being a psychological weapon, can be a physical shield. Have you ever stopped to think that one less response could mean one less danger? Interestingly, this principle is repeated even in the animal world. Studies of predators show that animals often look for signs of reaction to decide whether to advance or not. A predator hesitates when faced with prey that doesn't react as expected. The unexpected creates doubt, and doubt creates caution. It's no different in human interaction. Those who remain silent when everyone expects noise create a similar effect. They instill caution. This caution is the first step towards respect. How many attacks have you suffered simply because you reacted the way they expected? What's most surprising is that in certain cultures, silence isn't seen as emptiness, but as wisdom. Indigenous peoples, for example, value long pauses before answering questions, interpreting silence as a sign of deep reflection. In contrast, Western societies tend to associate it with insecurity. This cultural clash reveals a crucial detail. How silence is interpreted depends on who uses it and how it's sustained. The same gesture can be seen as weakness in one person and authority in another. What image does your silence convey today? In the digital world, where everyone competes for attention with words, posts, and opinions, silence is even rarer and therefore even more powerful. Not responding immediately to a message creates anticipation. Not speaking out in a controversy creates mystery. Not reacting to a public provocation dismantles the trap of those who wanted to turn their response into a spectacle. Those who know how to use silence on social media often achieve more impact than those who talk non-stop. Have you ever noticed how anxious people get, waiting for a reaction that never comes? Have you noticed how silence can be more talked about than any response? Strategic silence isn't just a reaction, it's a preparation. It's the pause before the music's highest note, the space that gives meaning to the phrase, the absence that creates memory. It transforms any subsequent gesture into something greater because it builds anticipation. That's why those who know how to wait always speak at the right moment with multiplied weight. Have you ever wondered how many opportunities you missed because you didn't wait for the ideal moment to speak? And then the inevitable question arises, how many more times will you rush to explain what doesn't need explaining? How many times will you respond immediately just to ease others' discomfort? How many times will you waste the most subtle and powerful weapon you've ever had? Respect isn't built on a single gesture, but on repetition that builds reputation. A single firm response may impress, but if it isn't repeated, it fades. True weight comes from consistency, from the constant firmness that transforms actions into identity. When someone sees you resist once, they may think it was a fluke. When they see you resist again and again, they understand it's your essence. That's what scares, that's what attracts, that's what generates respect. No matter what anyone says, deep down everyone tests others to see where the limits are. And limits are only respected when they are consistent. A cracked wall protects no one. A barrier that opens on occasion isn't a barrier, it's an illusion. Respect is born when the world realizes that, in your presence, the rules don't change. Consistency has an almost invisible yet devastating force. Think of someone who never gives in to the same kind of provocation. At first, they try to mock, insist, and test in every way, but after several failed attempts, they understand it's futile. The person becomes seen as unshakable, like a rock resisting the tide. This is the moment when authority takes hold. There's no need to speak loudly, no need to threaten. The simple history of never giving in creates a wall no one dares to scale. Have you ever wondered how many times you've lost authority because you were firm one day and wavered the next? Life is full of examples of how consistency builds respect. Think of a boss who is tough but fair every day. Employees may dislike him, they may complain, but deep down they know his rules are clear. Now compare that to a boss who is strict one day and complacent the next, who pushes deadlines one day and lets everything slide the next. This boss doesn't inspire respect, only confusion. People test how far they can go because they know he'll change his mind. The same thing happens in relationships. A partner who sets clear boundaries and sticks to them builds trust. A partner who oscillates between firmness and permissiveness breeds insecurity. This oscillation corrodes respect like rust on exposed iron. Have you ever noticed how many lose ground, not because of a lack of strength, but because of a lack of consistent firmness? But consistency isn't just about others. It's about you. Every time you maintain a limit, you strengthen your own internal image. Every time you compromise, you weaken yourself. External respect is a reflection of internal discipline. Those who are consistent on the inside radiate that attitude outward. Those who negotiate with themselves every day, who betray themselves in small ways, who make exceptions for the sake of immediate comfort, will never have the strength to impose anything on the world. Because how can you expect others to respect your limits if you don't even respect your own? This is the root of many people's failure. It's not that others don't recognize your worth, it's that you deny it every time you choose the easy way out. There's an inevitable tension in being consistent. The world can't stand those who won't compromise. There will always be pressure to make exceptions, to be flexible, to show that you can be nice too. Deep down, this is just an attempt to test you. They want to see if your firmness is real or just a facade. And when you give in, when you laugh to lighten the mood, when you accept just this once, everyone understands it was an act. Your reputation plummets in seconds. The respect built up over months evaporates in minutes. The price of consistency is high, but the price of inconsistency is devastating. How many times have you thrown away your authority by not standing your ground to the end? There are impressive accounts of people who built entire careers based solely on consistency. Athletes who never missed training, even when sick, and were therefore seen as natural leaders. Political leaders who never broke their word and were therefore feared even by their enemies. Entrepreneurs who never failed to meet deadlines and therefore became benchmarks of reliability. In all these cases, respect came not from charisma or talent, but from unwavering predictability, knowing that person would always act the same way, no matter what. This certainty is rare and therefore valuable. Have you ever noticed how we trust someone who is predictable more, even if we don't like them? than someone who constantly fluctuates? Consistency builds reputation, and reputation builds anticipation. When someone knows you never take an offensive joke, they think twice before making it. When they know you never pay other people's bills, they stop asking for more. When they understand you never respond to pointless provocations, they stop wasting their time. Respect isn't born from your last response, but from the sum of all of them. Each repetition is a building block in the construction of your image, and this image becomes so solid that it begins to act in your place. Have you ever thought how different your life would be if your reputation spoke for you before you even opened your mouth? But the opposite is also true. Those who are inconsistent create a reputation for fragility. If they sometimes react and sometimes don't, others keep testing them because they never know when they'll get what they want, and uncertainty motivates them. It's like a gambler who bets because they know that, even if they lose several times, they'll eventually win. This is how many are treated, like bets. One day they resist, the next they give in, and because of this they are never respected. Fluctuation is an open invitation to disrespect. Have you ever noticed how many people around you continue to be exploited because they are predictably inconsistent? At times, life presents you with choices where maintaining consistency seems too costly, losing friends, missing opportunities, missing praise. But in reality, these losses are filters. Anyone who walks away because you maintained your boundaries was never an ally, merely someone interested in your flexibility. Anyone who tries to convince you to make exceptions doesn't respect you. They respect the convenience of using you. It's in the moments when firmness seems most painful that it becomes most valuable, because it's in these moments that the world watches and decides whether your walls are made of stone or sand. How far are you willing to pay the price of consistency? The curious thing is that over time, consistency stops being an effort and becomes identity. In the beginning, every limit is an internal battle. Every no is a burden. Every silence is a discomfort. But as you repeat, you create a habit, and habit becomes character. The day comes when you no longer need to think about how to react, because the reaction is already engraved in you. That's when others no longer even try, because they know in advance what your stance will be. This is the final stage of respect, when your reputation is so strong that no one dares to test it. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to live in a world where you no longer have to defend yourself because everyone already knows it's not worth trying? But to get to that point, you have to go through the most difficult phases. The beginning, when everyone tests your new stance, and the middle, when they try to convince you to give up. Many give up halfway through because the price of consistency seems unbearable. But it's precisely these people who never experience the power of being unbreakable, because consistency isn't about an act, but about pushing through discomfort until it becomes strength. Are you willing to go through this fire to become unshakable? Life takes a heavy toll on those who aren't consistent. It takes its toll in nights of regret, in memories of humiliation, in scars from missed opportunities. It takes its toll in relationships where you always gave more than you received, in jobs where you were never appreciated, in friendships that only existed because you gave in. Each piece of inconsistency accumulates until one day you realize you wasted years trying to please everyone while no one truly respected you. How many of these wounds do you carry today? And it's at this point that the inevitable twist arises, the discovery that consistency isn't just about others, it's about who you become. It's about looking in the mirror and seeing someone you don't need to be ashamed of. It's about living without the guilt of having given in again. It's about walking knowing that each step supports your word. External respect is merely a reflection. The true reward of consistency is inner peace. Have you ever considered what it would be like to live without the burden of self-betrayal? Respect becomes a wall when you refuse to compromise your principles. This wall isn't made of arrogance, but of clarity. It isn't made of violence, but of repetition. And once erected, it protects more than your image, it protects your dignity. The world can laugh, it can mock, it can tempt, but in the end, it always bows before those who never yield. And the question that remains, the only one that matters, is how long will you live behind cracked walls, expecting others to respect something you yourself don't protect? We've reached the point where all the pieces align. Every detail, every reflection, every provocation throughout this journey has converged into this moment. Respect isn't a product of luck. It doesn't arise by chance. It doesn't appear as an automatic reward for kindness or intelligence. It's the result of conscious choices, repeated with discipline, sustained with consistency, and strengthened by the courage to face discomfort. Along the way, we've seen how disrespect begins with subtle gestures, how it spreads when left unaddressed, how silence can be both a prison and a weapon, how consistency builds invisible walls that protect your dignity. Now is the time to bring it all together and transform it into practice, into clear direction, into real change. Because knowledge without action is just weight, and you've already carried too much weight in the form of humiliation, regret, and sleepless nights, remembering what you should have said. This is the moment to transform pain into strength, memories into strategy, theory into action. The first step is to recognize that respect begins in the mirror. There's no more direct statement, no harsher truth. If you don't respect yourself, no one else will. This means breaking the habit of negotiating with yourself. It means stopping making excuses to justify your lack of firmness. It means saying no to yourself when you feel like giving in out of laziness or fear. The cruelest enemy you'll ever face is your own inner voice telling you it's not worth it, that it's better to avoid problems, that maybe it's not that important. This voice is the same one that convinced you to smile to hide your embarrassment, to accept jokes that belittled you, to pay bills that weren't yours, to carry burdens that should never have been on your shoulders. If you want to change the world around you, you must first silence this voice within yourself. You must become the uncompromising guardian of your own dignity. The second step is to apply the rule of constancy to small gestures. You don't have to start by changing everything all at once. Choose an area of your life where disrespect recurs. It could be at work, at home, among friends, or even on social media. Identify the pattern. Recognize the moment you consistently give in, and break that cycle firmly. If it's interruptions in meetings, decide you'll never allow it again. If it's the colleague who always asks for favors, learn to say no. If it's the friend who insists on making humiliating jokes, return the burden of silence. Each time you stand your ground, you strengthen your reputation, and the more you repeat it, the more this pattern becomes ingrained in you and in the eyes of others. At first it will be uncomfortable, then it will become habit, and finally it will become natural. This is how you build the identity of someone who cannot be used. The third step is to master strategic silence. Most emotional defeats happen because we react too quickly. We speak when we should wait, we explain ourselves when we should be silent, we justify ourselves when we should just watch. The practice of silence is a daily practice. Take a deep breath. Count to 3 before responding to any provocation. Observe the other person's reaction. Feel the power that grows when you take your time. Use silence as a weight, not an escape. It's not about remaining silent forever, but about learning to choose when and how to speak. This simple adjustment transforms your presence. People stop predicting your reactions and begin to fear uncertainty. And uncertainty is the seed of respect. Ask yourself, how many times were my defeats born of haste? How many times would my life have been different if I had waited a few seconds before speaking? The fourth step is to understand that consistency is more important than intensity. Anyone can have a moment of firmness. Anyone can command respect once, but few sustain it every day. The world observes the pattern, not the moment. If you assert yourself today and give in tomorrow, your word loses weight. But if you maintain the same stance over and over, others understand it's not worth trying. And over time, they stop testing. It's at this point that respect becomes automatic, that your reputation speaks before you even open your mouth. Remember, your life is the sum of the times you've stood your ground or given in. Every choice adds up. What balance are you building right now? The fifth step is to accept that there will be losses. Being respected means disappointing some, losing superficial friendships, and breaking ties with people who are only there for you because they could easily use you. This may hurt, but it's a necessary pain. Better to lose what was never true than to live in constant self-betrayal. You don't need everyone. You only need those who understand the value of who you are. Those who walk away were never part of your life, only part of your exploration. When you stand firm, the world reorganizes around you. New connections emerge. People who respect your stance approach you. Opportunities that require seriousness appear. The initial price seems high, but the return is incalculable. Ask yourself, what's the point of being surrounded by so many if none of them truly respect you? The sixth step is to cultivate presence as an invisible weapon. Respect isn't limited to isolated words or actions, but to what your mere existence communicates. Your posture, your gaze, your calm in the face of chaos, your ability to remain unfazed by provocations, all of these convey more powerful messages than speeches. Practice being present without anxiety, taking up space without asking permission, walking firmly even without rushing. This presence becomes an aura, and the aura speaks louder than any explanation. How many times have you respected someone not for what they said, but for how they behaved? Now ask yourself, what kind of aura are you transmitting? And finally, the seventh step is continuous action. There is no definitive transformation without daily practice. Respect needs to be renewed every day, in every choice, in every gesture, in every silence. Don't wait to feel ready. Don't wait for courage to arrive. Courage is born in action. Respect begins with the first no, the first sustained silence, the first imposed limit. Then it grows stronger with repetition. It's a path of no return, but it's also a liberating path. When you finally understand that you don't need to bow down, that you don't need to justify yourself, that you don't need to be used, you discover a peace that no empty praise has ever brought. This is true freedom, living without asking permission to exist. And here is the final revelation. The respect you seek in the eyes of others has always been a reflection of the respect you've denied yourself. When you change within, the world changes without. When you decide to never again compromise your dignity, the universe around you begins to reorganize itself. It's not mysticism, it's social logic. The world treats you as you train the world to treat you. The power isn't in others, it's in your decision. A decision you can make now. You can keep repeating the same mistakes, laughing at unfunny jokes, paying prices that aren't yours, living as a supporting actor in your own life. Or you can decide that this is the moment everything changes. The moment every boundary is upheld, every silence strategic, every action consistent. The moment you refuse to be the stage for disrespect and become the protagonist of your own story. There are no shortcuts. There are no tricks. There is only the daily discipline of respecting yourself so that the world follows suit. This discipline transforms the way you walk, speak, look, and live. It builds a reputation that endures for years, presence that commands silence, an authority that needs no explanation. This is the legacy you can start building now. Not tomorrow, not when you're more prepared, not when the circumstances are ideal, but now. Because every second of waiting is another second you train the world to use you, and every second of decision is another brick in the wall that protects your dignity. This is the end of one journey, but also the beginning of another. From today on, you can no longer plead ignorance. You know that every gesture counts, that every silence weighs, that every repetition shapes. Now the choice is yours. Continue in the cycle of submission, or build a life of unwavering respect. And if this message resonated with you, if it somehow touched something deep within you, I want you to do two simple things right now. Like this video so it reaches more people, leave your comment, even anonymously if you prefer, and subscribe to the channel to follow the next chapters of this transformation. This is your chance to not only listen, but to act. And believe me, the difference between those who are respected and those who are forgotten begins right here, right now.